Elaine Carter had grown accustomed to the hush that settled over the cul-de-sac after sunset. At 62, she rarely expected phone calls or visitors, and she liked it that way. The days had a gentle rhythm. She rose early to water the geraniums, listened to the ticking of the old kitchen clock while she prepared lunch, then spent the evening hours in her armchair with a well-worn paperback. She took comfort in knowing precisely when the neighborhood children returned from school, which porch lights turned on by timers, and how the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into a lullaby around 9 o'clock. Peace was her companion, and she held it close. Peace was her companion, and she held it close. But peace, as she was about to learn, is something you fight to keep. If you believe in protecting the vulnerable, even when it's not your fight, hit like, subscribe, and let us know where you're watching from. She had lost her husband, Thomas, 5 years ago, and his absence felt sharper in the evenings. Sometimes, when she passed their wedding photograph on the mantel, she would whisper a few words of quiet greeting, as if he might still hear her from wherever he had gone. Her nieces called on holidays, sent cards on her birthday, and occasionally dropped in when they happened to be in town. But largely, Elaine's life had narrowed to neat boundaries. The comfortable solitude kept her anchored. Then she noticed the boy. She first caught sight of him while washing the dinner dishes one Monday evening, the window above the sink giving a clear view of the house next door. She thought she knew every neighbor's face on the cul-de-sac, but the boy was new, thin arms, hair that hung in uneven curls around his forehead, and a gaze that drifted blankly toward the street. He wore a long-sleeved shirt, though the day had been unusually hot. His father, or at least the man who accompanied him, had introduced himself in passing as Rick, some sort of construction worker, he had said, with a handshake that felt overcompensatingly firm. Elaine had offered a polite smile and retreated, thinking nothing more of it at the time. A few days later, she noticed the boy again. He was in the yard, hauling a heavy trash bin toward the curb, struggling with its weight. It was nearly midnight. Elaine had gone to the kitchen for a glass of water, and in the glow of the street lamp, she saw him grimace as he tugged the bin over the grass. It struck her as odd. She never saw him ride a bike or kick a ball around the way children usually did. Instead, he drifted along the driveway, shoulders hunched, always in those two long sleeves. Something about his posture made her heart clench. That sense of unease deepened when she spotted a bruise on his wrist while he was trimming shrubs. The boy glanced toward her house, and their eyes met for a moment. He quickly ducked his head as if caught doing something wrong. Elaine's skin prickled with a worry she couldn't yet name. She had known heartbreak, but this was different, a slow burn of fear she couldn't shake. Late one evening, while rinsing a baking tray, she saw the porch light at the boy's house flicker 3 times in quick succession. She paused, hands dripping, and peered out the window. There he was, silhouetted by that feeble light. His arm hovered near the switch, his eyes fixed on Elaine's window with a startling intensity. Then the light went out. Elaine's chest tightened as she listened to the silence pressing in around her kitchen. She found herself clutching the edge of the sink, uncertain what any of this meant. She tried to reason it away. Maybe the child was restless or bored or simply playing a game. But the unsettling feeling refused to leave. The next day she decided to extend a neighborly courtesy. She baked a loaf of banana bread, wrapped it in foil, and knocked on Rick's door. The boy answered before she could even knock a second time. Up close, he looked even smaller than she had thought. The sleeves nearly swallowed his hands. "Hi there," she said gently. "I'm Elaine from next door. I baked this for you both." For a moment he just stared, eyes darting toward the hallway behind him. Then Rick appeared, that smile of his curving across his face in a way that made Elaine uneasy. He gestured her inside, though he didn't seem pleased about the invitation. A stale odor lingered in the air, some mix of cigarettes and neglect. Boxes piled in the corner, half unpacked. And then Elaine spotted a padlocked door further down the hall. She nearly asked about it, but her attention shifted to the boy's wrist, the unmistakable shape of a bruise, yellow around the edges as though it had been there a while. She swallowed hard. "Just a storage area," Rick said when he noticed her gaze. "This kid is always snooping around, so I lock it up to keep him out of trouble." He laughed, a strained sound that echoed too long in the cramped space. Elaine forced a polite smile, though her heart pounded. "Well, I just wanted to welcome you." She placed the banana bread on the kitchen counter and left quickly, her nerves simmering. At home, she paced the living room, uncertain what to do. Memories of Thomas stirred in her mind, how he used to say that ignoring warning signs was a sure way to let trouble root deeper. She rummaged through the hallway closet until she found the battered police scanner he had used during his time on the force. She dusted it off, plugged it in, and listened to the static hiss to life. Mostly, it picked up routine calls for traffic stops and noise complaints in distant neighborhoods. Still, having it near soothed her, a small connection to the man who had taught her always to remain vigilant. Over the coming weeks, Elaine kept her ears open. She heard snippets of heated arguments from next door. She scribbled times and dates in a small notebook tucked beneath her knitting basket. Whenever the boy emerged, she watched for new bruises. Sometimes she saw him wince when Rick barked an order. Sometimes Elaine glimpsed him hauling crates or heavy bags from the trunk of Rick's car, as though forced into labor that went well beyond normal chores. Her anxiety grew so insistent that she called her niece, Tanya, who worked with Child Protective Services in a neighboring county. Tanya listened sympathetically but explained that without concrete proof, a formal intervention would be difficult. Elaine felt her chest tighten with frustration. She had no photos, no eyewitness beyond herself. The boy, after all, never spoke up. He only looked at her with those watchful eyes, as though silently begging her to do something. Late one night, Elaine was about to switch off the living room lamp when a soft tapping startled her. 3 gentle knocks on the back door. She approached with caution, heart pounding against her ribcage. Through the glass pane, she saw the boy standing barefoot on her stoop. His hair was wild and there was a small gash on his palm. He trembled so badly he could barely meet her gaze. "He locked me out," he said when she opened the door, voice barely above a whisper. "Said he's not letting me back in." Elaine ushered him inside, shutting and bolting the door behind them. She pressed a clean cloth to his wounded hand, her own hands shaking. She brewed him tea, though it was close to midnight, and let him sip it at the kitchen table while she tried to wrap her head around the reality of this moment. This boy had nowhere else to go. His father, if that man even deserved the title, had simply cast him out into the darkness. Tears threatened at the corners of Elaine's eyes, but she fought them back and prepared the spare bedroom, laying fresh sheets and digging out an extra pillow. When she checked on him later, he was already asleep, curled into a small ball, as though bracing himself for further harm. She noticed a threadbare stuffed rabbit on the bedside table, clearly something he had grabbed before fleeing. How long, she wondered, had he been planning for such a desperate escape? At dawn, Elaine's phone rang. Tanya's voice on the other end was urgent. Elaine explained the situation. The boy was at her house, he needed protection, and they both feared the father's reaction. Tanya promised to expedite an emergency protective order, but legal matters moved slowly at the best of times. Rick showed up a few hours later, banging on Elaine's door so hard it rattled. She felt the boy shrink behind her, saw the fear in his eyes. Her pulse thundered, but she refused to yield. Years of living in quiet grief had forged a surprising reservoir of strength within her. She retrieved a certain item from the drawer, her husband's old service weapon which she had kept locked away, and held it in trembling hands. She didn't want to use it, but the presence of it gave her resolve. "Open this door," Rick shouted. "He's my son." Elaine stood on the other side, voice unsteady but determined. "You're not welcome here," she said loudly enough for him to hear. "Leave now or I'll call the police." She felt the boy behind her, small fingers clutching the back of her sweater. Outside, Rick hurled threats and curses that made her sick to her stomach. She risked a look through the peephole, saw his twisted expression. He looked ready to break the door down. Elaine braced herself, hand tight on the doorknob. But before Rick could do anything more, a burst of sirens whooped from the street. Red and blue lights drenched the front porch. Elaine heard shouts, the crackle of a radio, the slam of a car door. She sagged with relief as uniformed officers sprinted onto her lawn. Tanya must have pulled strings, mobilizing help faster than normal procedure allowed. Elaine let out a trembling breath. She heard the officers commanding Rick to step aside, then more voices that blurred together in a swirl of confusion. The boy's grip on her sweater loosened. One of the officers knocked, this time gently. When she opened the door, Rick was already being led away, his face livid. The boy pressed against Elaine's side, breath shuddering. An officer looked at Elaine with concern, asked if they were all right, and then guided them through the formalities of a statement. Elaine's hand still shook. She found herself unable to say much more than a few broken words. The officer knelt to speak with the boy, who still hadn't let go of Elaine's arm. Before the sun rose again, Rick was in custody. Officers found a locked room at his place, evidence that confirmed the worst suspicions. Elaine's statement, along with the boy's visible injuries, was enough to ensure he'd be held. Neighbors watched from behind curtains, offering no words of comfort. Yet the hush that followed felt different from the quiet Elaine had once cherished. This was a silence charged with relief and aftershock. She guided the boy back inside. Her heart hammered and tears slipped down her cheeks, but she forced a reassuring smile for his sake. He clung to her like she was the only safe haven he'd ever known, his small body trembling from a nightmarish ordeal that no child should endure. Elaine closed the door, the morning light just creeping over the rooftops, and in that moment she realized nothing in her life would be the same. She tightened her arms around him and whispered, "You're safe now." Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this.